My sister Sophie died on a Tuesday. Thursday, I inherited her job. By Saturday, I was sleeping in her bed. The Harrington Estate didn't give you much time to grieve. The position must be filled immediately, Mr. Caldwell had explained, straightening his bow tie as we stood beside Sophie's fresh grave. He was the Harrington family's attorney, a man whose clinical detachment made him perfect for delivering bad news to the living while standing among the dead. The family insists that continuity of care for the house is essential. I should have asked why. I should have wondered about the urgency, about why my sister's position as a live-in curator for a historic mansion couldn't remain vacant long enough for her body to cool in the ground. Instead, I thought about my empty bank account, my terminated lease, and the student loans that had devoured half my teaching salary. "When do I start?" I asked. Caldwell nodded as if my acceptance had been a foregone conclusion. Perhaps it was. The Harringtons had always gotten what they wanted from my family. "Miss Eliza will expect you tomorrow. Bring only personal items. The curator's quarters are fully furnished." As Caldwell walked away, I felt raindrops begin to fall, fat, sporadic drops that seemed to target the fresh mound of Sophie's grave with peculiar precision. I looked up at the sky, mostly blue, save for a single dark cloud that had materialized directly overhead. A coincidence, I told myself. The first of many I would choose to ignore. Harrington House sat at the edge of Miller's Pond, a small town whose prosperity had risen and fallen with the fortunes of the Harrington Brewing Company. In the late 1800s, the Harringtons had transformed a local beer operation into a national empire. Their mansion, built in 1891, stood as a monument to that success. 3 stories of ornate Victorian excess with a distinctive copper-domed tower that had gone green with verdigris long ago. The brewery closed in 1955, after the 4th Harrington suicide in 60 years. The family's beer was no longer produced. Still, their wealth remained, managed now by Eliza Harrington, the last living descendant, a woman in her 70s who occupied the mansion's 3rd floor and rarely came down. My sister had worked for her for 5 years. Now it was my turn. "You look just like her," said Wilson, the groundskeeper, as he helped carry my suitcases up the grand staircase. He was in his 60s, stooped and weathered, with eyes that didn't quite focus on what he was looking at. "It's uncanny, almost like she never left." "We're twins," I said. "We were twins." "Ah." He nodded as if this explained something important. "That makes sense then." "Makes sense? How?" But Wilson had already moved on, mumbling something about checking the boiler, leaving me alone at the entrance to what would now be my quarters, the curator's suite on the 2nd floor. I pushed open the door and froze. The room was exactly as Sophie had left it, bed unmade, a book splayed open on the nightstand, a half-empty cup of tea beside it. Even her reading glasses lay folded on the pillow, as if she'd stepped out for a moment. "We left it as it was," came a voice from behind me. I told them not to touch anything. I turned to find an elegant, silver-haired woman watching me from the hallway. Eliza Harrington was tall and straight-backed despite her age, with sharp green eyes set in a face that might once have been beautiful before time, and something else, something harder to define, had carved deep lines around her mouth and between her brows. "Miss Harrington," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Claire Monroe. Thank you for—" "I know who you are." She didn't take my hand. "You'll want to settle in. Dinner is at 7. I eat in my room, but Mrs. Winters will leave a tray outside your door." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The West Wing is closed. All of it. Under no circumstances are you to enter those rooms. Is that clear?" Before I could respond, she was gone, the soft tap of her cane on hardwood receding down the hallway. I turned back to Sophie's room, my room now, and tried to ignore the growing sensation that I was an intruder. Moving to the window, I looked out over the estate's expansive grounds. In the distance, I could see the family cemetery with its ornate mausoleums and stone angels. As I watched, Wilson appeared, carrying something toward the largest tomb. He stopped suddenly and looked up at my window. Even from this distance, I could feel his gaze. He raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave, but felt more like a warning. I stepped back from the window. On the nightstand, Sophie's book caught my attention. It was an old leather-bound volume, its gilt title faded but still legible. The Harrington Legacy, A Family History. A bookmark protruded from about halfway through. I opened the marked page and found a section circled in red ink. Frederick Harrington, 1872 to 1919, took his own life with a revolver in the West Wing study after the mysterious disappearance of his youngest daughter, Catherine. According to household staff, Frederick claimed to hear Catherine crying in the walls of the house for weeks after police concluded their unsuccessful search. His suicide note contained only the words, "She's still here." Sophie had written a single word, "listening." Below it, another section was circled. Margaret Harrington, 1901 to 1931, Frederick's eldest daughter. Following her father's suicide, Margaret became increasingly concerned with the spiritual health of the family home. Records indicate she consulted mediums and psychics, claiming the house was infected with sorrow. She was found hanged in the West Wing on the anniversary of her father's death. No note was found. Sophie's handwriting again, "watching." I flipped through more pages, finding similar annotations beside each account of a Harrington death. Most disturbing were the notes beside the entry for Victor Harrington, who shot himself in 1955. The last male heir, Victor, was known for erratic behavior following the stillbirth of his son. Household staff reported that he spent hours in the West Wing, conversing with unseen presences. Victor claimed the child had not died, but had been taken by the house as payment. He took his life with the same revolver used by his grandfather, Frederick. Sophie had written, "He's right. The house takes payment." And below that, underlined 3 times, "We're next." I closed the book, my hands shaking. This was nonsense, the paranoid scribblings of my sister in her final days. Sophie had always been the high-strung one, prone to anxieties and dark moods. We might have been identical in appearance, but our temperaments were opposites. She imaginative and emotional, I practical and rational. Yet suicide had never seemed in character for her, no matter how troubled she might have been. I began unpacking, trying to push away the discomfort of displacing my sister's belongings to make room for my own. As I opened the closet, something small and metallic fell from the shelf above, landing with a heavy thud on the hardwood floor. A revolver, old but well-maintained. I picked it up carefully, finding it heavier than expected. The grip was inlaid with mother-of-pearl. The barrel is inscribed with scrollwork too fine to have been machine-made. "That would be Frederick's," came Eliza Harrington's voice from the doorway. I hadn't heard her approach. "The family heirloom. Every Harrington who has taken their life in this house has used that gun." "What is it doing in my sister's closet?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Eliza's expression remained impassive. Perhaps she was contemplating joining the family tradition. "Sophie didn't kill herself," I said automatically, the words escaping before I could consider them. "She hanged herself in the West Wing music room, Ms. Monroe. The caretaker found her at 6:17 in the morning. Those are the facts, regardless of what you'd prefer to believe." I stared at her, speechless. The police report had mentioned only that Sophie was found in the house, dead by hanging. Nothing about the West Wing, the forbidden wing. Why would she be in the West Wing if it's off limits? Eliza's eyes narrowed slightly. That is precisely the question. Why don't you put that gun away before someone else gets hurt? After she left, I placed the revolver in the nightstand drawer, my mind racing. Sophie had been troubled lately, yes. Our last few phone conversations had been strange, with her talking about voices in the walls and eyes behind the paintings. I'd meant to visit to check on her, but there was always something more pressing. Now, she was gone, and I was her replacement in more ways than one. That night, I had a dream about Sophie. We were children again, playing hide-and-seek in an enormous house that was and wasn't Harrington House. Bigger, darker, with endless corridors that looped back on themselves. I was searching for her, hearing her giggle just around corners, catching glimpses of her white dress disappearing through doorways. But when I finally found her, she was hanging from the ceiling, slowly turning, her face purple and bloated. "You're it now," she said, her voice somehow clear despite her crushed windpipe. "You're the payment." I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat. The bedroom was freezing despite the summer heat outside. On the window, visible in the moonlight, was a pattern of frost, delicate, crystalline formations that looked almost like writing. As I watched, they melted away, leaving only ordinary glass. A cold draft, I told myself. An old house is settling. Nothing more. But as I lay back down, I heard it, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a child crying somewhere in the vast house. A sound that faded when I held my breath to listen more closely and resumed when I exhaled, as if it existed only in the moments between my conscious attention. Days passed. I fell into the routine of my new role, maintaining the historic rooms open to occasional tours, cataloging the family artifacts, and managing the minimal staff. The mansion's requirements were light. Its secrets were heavier. I began to notice things. The way certain rooms seemed to change temperature dramatically without explanation. The persistent smell of pipe tobacco in the library, though no one in the house smoked. The sound of footsteps overhead when Eliza was demonstrably elsewhere. Most disturbing were the photographs. The mansion contained dozens of them. Formal portraits of stern-faced Harringtons going back generations. In several, I noticed a peculiar distortion in the background, a smudge that resembled a human figure standing behind the subject. The same smudge appeared in photos spanning decades, always in the same position relative to the subject, always just slightly out of focus. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, avoided my questions about these anomalies. Wilson would only shake his head and mutter about family matters. Eliza remained in her third-floor sanctuary, summoning me occasionally to review household accounts or discuss maintenance issues, but never staying in my presence longer than necessary. I began keeping a journal, documenting the strange occurrences. Day 7. They heard a music box playing from the West Wing at 3:14 a.m. The melody was Beautiful Dreamer. When I approached the sealed door to the wing, the music stopped abruptly. Day 9. Found all the books in the library turned backward on their shelves, spines facing inward. Mrs. Winters claimed they were normal when she dusted yesterday. Day 12. I woke to find a child's handprint in dust on my nightstand, too small to be mine. When I touched it, the dust scattered as if blown by breath, though the air was still. Each night, the sounds from the West Wing grew more distinct, sometimes music, crying, sometimes what sounded like a conversation just below the threshold of comprehension. Sleep became difficult, then nearly impossible. I began to understand the hollow-eyed exhaustion I'd noticed in Sophie during her final months. On my 14th night in the house, I decided I could no longer resist investigating the West Wing. Something had happened to my sister there, and the same something was now happening to me. The dreams had become more vivid. Sophie calling to me from behind the sealed doors, begging me to find the truth in the walls. I waited until after midnight, when the house had settled into its creaking, sighing nighttime rhythm. Taking a flashlight and the skeleton key I'd found in Sophie's desk, a key I suspected would open the forbidden wing, I made my way through the darkened mansion. The door to the West Wing was at the end of a long corridor lined with family portraits. As I moved toward it, I could have sworn the painted eyes followed my progress. The key turned smoothly in the lock as if the mechanism had been recently oiled. The door swung open silently, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. The air that rushed out was cold and stale, carrying a faint medicinal smell. I stepped across the threshold, feeling an immediate pressure change, a sensation of weight as if the atmosphere itself was denser here. My flashlight illuminated elegant furnishings draped in white sheets, creating the impression of ghosts frozen in various poses throughout the long gallery. At the far end stood another door, partially open, a faint light glimmering beyond it. As I approached, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Sophie's voice, humming a lullaby our mother used to sing. The music room was exactly as it must have been decades ago, with no dust, clothes, or signs of neglect. A grand piano dominated the space, its polished surface reflecting the moonlight that streamed through tall windows. And there, in the center of the room, hanging from an exposed beam, was a rope, its end neatly coiled on the floor beneath, as if waiting. "Sophie," I whispered, "what happened to you?" "She joined us," came a voice behind me, Eliza Harrington's, but somehow altered, with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in my bones rather than my ears. "As you will." I turned to find her standing in the doorway, no cane in sight, her posture unnaturally straight. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, stood Wilson and Mrs. Winters, their faces expressionless. "What did you do to my sister?" I demanded. "Nothing she didn't agree to," Eliza said. "Nothing you haven't already agreed to as well, by coming here, by taking her place." "I don't understand." "The house requires payment, Ms. Monroe. It has since Frederick made his bargain. One Harrington dies each generation to maintain the family fortune. But we've run out of Harringtons." She gestured around the room. "Your sister discovered this, found the contract in the walls where Frederick hid it, signed in blood and other things. She understood what was needed." "You're insane," I whispered. "Am I?" "You've heard them, haven't you? The voices, the crying. The house is hungry, Ms. Monroe. It's been patient, waiting for you to accept your inheritance. Your sister took too long to understand, fought it until the very end. I had hoped you might be more amenable." From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, shadows detaching from the walls, forming into human-shaped voids that drifted closer. Within them, I caught glimpses of faces, a young girl with hollow eyes, a man in Victorian clothing with half his head missing, and others too distorted to recognize. And among them, most terrible of all, Sophie, her neck bent at an unnatural angle, her eyes fixed on mine. "One Monroe death each generation," Eliza continued. "That was the new bargain your sister made to spare you, but twins present a special opportunity, a loophole, if you will. The house might accept a substitute if similar enough." I backed away until I felt the piano against my spine. "You expect me to kill myself?" "Oh, no," Eliza smiled, the expression transforming her face into something inhuman. "The house prefers to take its payment directly." The shadows surged forward, surrounding me, their cold touch like ice against my skin. I heard Sophie's voice in my ear. "I tried to warn you. I tried to save you." In desperation, I reached into my pocket where I'd placed Frederick's revolver before coming to the west wing. I raised it, not toward Eliza or the encroaching shadows, but to my temple. "If the house needs a Monroe," I said, "it can have one on my terms." Eliza's smile faltered. The shadows hesitated. "You misunderstand," she said quickly. "The bargain requires sacrifice, but not death. Not always. The house feeds on potential, what might have been. A life redirected, dedicated to its service. That's all." But I saw the lie in her eyes, in the way the shadows trembled with anticipation. I kept the gun pressed to my head. "Sophie didn't hang herself, did she? You killed her when she threatened to expose whatever this is, when she wouldn't agree to your bargain." "She was weak," Eliza hissed, her pretense of refinement falling away. "She found the contract but didn't have the strength to uphold it, to become its guardian, as I have been, as you could be." "No," I said, and pulled the trigger. The click of the hammer on an empty chamber echoed in the sudden silence. Eliza laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Frederick's gun hasn't been loaded since 1955, Ms. Monroe. Victor used the last bullet. The others you've seen here, They chose the rope, the pills, the blade. More intimate methods, more satisfying for the house. The shadows closed in, Sophie's among them, her expression a mixture of sorrow and resignation. I felt their cold embrace, drawing something essential from me. Not my life, but my future, my potential, the person I might have become. I understood then what my sister had realized too late. The house didn't just take lives, it collected souls, binding them to themselves, feeding on their lost possibilities for all eternity. "I'm sorry, Sophie," I whispered as a darkness claimed me. "They say the Harrington house is haunted. Visitors report seeing identical twin women in the windows of the West Wing, one with a broken neck, one with hollow eyes where her future should have been. Both are trapped, both watching, both waiting. Wilson still tends the grounds. Mrs. Winters still keeps the dust at bay. Eliza still occupies the 3rd floor, though some say she hasn't aged a day in decades. And in the curator's quarters, my journal remains open on the desk, its final entry unfinished. I know what happened to Sophie now. I know what happens to all of us who serve this house. We become its payment, not our deaths, but our afterlives. Bound to these walls, our potential feeds something ancient and hungry. If you're reading this, you're already too late. You're none. The Harrington Estate didn't give me time to finish. It doesn't give anyone time to escape.